How do we categorize people? Are all people basically the same? Do we all want the same things? You might say thus, does the Christian Scriptures' designation of all of us as sinners who fall short of the glory of God the most accurate way of portraying us? For, you might argue, there are greater sinners such as Hitler in terms of impact upon others in a negative sense, or Pol Pot or Stalin, compared to the lesser sinners of Noah, Esau, was there Enoch, and Joseph. And so, are all of us of the same mold, you might say? Now, there is also an interesting book. I bought it the other day, used, have yet to plow through any part of it. John Gray, probably a PhD holder, having written, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. I believe I have that title right. Well, there has always been discussion of the ways that men and women differ. I found various people such as, the comedian from New York City, what was his name? Very insightful. George Carlin. Also Caleb Jones, whose mother once was a nun, and his having reacted strongly to both that and being put in Catholic school, later taking up dating advice to people, men particularly. I find these individuals, also the man who started actualized.org, Leo Gura. I find all of them having very useful advice or comments about women in general and as compared to men. Yet, is that the totality then, to simply say there are two types of humans and that we are not thus homogeneous? We're not all the same in what we want and the issues we face in life, to include levels of anxiety and what most promotes that, and how we cope, to include how we are empowered against anxieties. Now, of course, then John Gray was addressing how men and women differ by saying they are basically from different planets. Maybe he would have loved to have said they're different species entirely. For, in one sense, a wolf is not a human being, but a lower form, you could say, of animal, a different form of animal, at any rate, than an elephant. And yet an elephant can be quite different than a wolf. Likewise, a Doberman Pinscher or Rottweiler is quite a different animal, still a dog, than is a Golden Retriever. And if one is blind, one would not likely be assigned a seeing eye dog that is a Doberman Pinscher. Or they would not be assigned likely either a Chihuahua, arguably some say a highly anxious animal, although I don't believe under all circumstances. At any rate, then, the question, are we all the same or not, as human beings, has been a confusing one, addressed amongst others, say, by Freud, by Erich Fromm, who wrote amongst other books, The Heart of Man. Maybe part of the problem is trying to examine things from lumping everybody together. Maybe it's discomforting to point out great differences. So at any rate, the upshot here, if men are from Mars and women are from Venus. What about theoretically introducing a few new categories? What about those who are infants, or babies, or young children? Where are they from? Could we say they are from Mercury? They are human beings too, aren't they? And yet, according to Christian scriptures, or thought especially in the past, one not being deemed worthy of hellfire damnation for theoretically not, quote, choosing a way in terms of faith before the, quote, age of accountability, often termed age 6 or so. They're thus a different type of person before the age of accountability, it is claimed. Why not call people below age 6 then the people from Mercury? Likewise, we accord a different status to people in older age whose minds have become very slowed or problematic in terms of coping, Alzheimer's people or dementia people. Why not call these people not from Mars or Venus or Mercury, but the people of, say, Neptune? I'm just throwing terms out here now. Now, one last category, though, that I do not see it being assigned much merit to or terminology, other than perhaps occasionally the word genius, is this. What about somebody who has had experiences, or a package of them, so unique, especially not just one or two experiences or assets given them, gifts some people call it, but a whole panoply, a whole group of them, that these persons arguably deserve another planet to have come from. Let's call them those from Pluto, or even another solar system like those from Sagittarius. How is that for one? It gets you thinking, for we have yet another word for this, perhaps, in an ironic religious sense. That's the word angels. And you see this referenced. There is, of course, the City of Angels. Is that Los Angeles? Yes. Then, wasn't there a show in which Michael Landon was in, and it being referred to angels? Maybe that wasn't him, but somebody else. Then from the movie Fried Green Tomatoes, somebody young, laying in bed, dying of cancer, having uttered a phrase that she believed there are many people, or some people, walking around planet Earth masquerading as angels. In other words, that they're very, very gifted persons in what you might say a profound beneficial sense. Then there is, of course, the idea of the very wise elderly Indian chief giving massive, great advice, great wisdom to those they are talking to. We've also had thus the term shaman, or various religious leaders through the ages. We may even prefer to call them, other than angels, saints, or inspired. Again, in the intellectual-only sphere, geniuses, we bring up then the idea of Einstein, for instance, or Stephen Hawking, the physicist who found himself in a wheelchair by age 25 or 30 from, I guess, ALS, Lou Gehrig's. Told he only had a few years to live, but in fact lived to age 70 or more before passing away a few years ago. Ironically, many having bought his book, compared to many other books, A Brief History of Time, arguably utterly unintelligible, full of mathematical symbology or words we have no idea the meaning of, but loving to have that on our bookshelf as a symbol of a genius. Noting, by the way, it is touted that Leonardo was a genius also. So whether we're going to call someone a genius, an angel, an inspired person of God, divine, what have you. The fact being that we love to make distinctions, or we try to make distinctions sometimes to put people on a, not pedestal, but an end of a continuum. On one end are the geniuses, the saints, or even term them angels, masquerading as human beings. On the opposite end, the despots, so to speak. But to claim we are all the same, I believe, is a misnomer at the slightest in terms of irony here. We are not all the same. And I believe John Gray tried to point that out when saying men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Figuratively speaking, different species. We don't want to admit such contradictions, and we don't want to admit such differences, do we? Noting, of course, that no saint, no arguably genius person is perfect. Einstein, having come, by the way, to America once for a trip, and then staying here later, was said to have stuck his foot in his mouth big time regarding comments about females. It then haunting him to the end of his days in the newspapers. At any rate, one final comment, and that is regarding looking for outliers, so to speak. It's so easy to lump everybody as being the same by initial inspection. This, in my opinion, happening much more when rushed or when very fearful, or both. And when one is competing for scarce resources, or in general finds oneself in a major urban area or even, quote, town. One then has far less opportunity to look for the outliers, call them the persons from not average settings, and thus make distinctions. Despite our having 2 arms and 2 legs and 1 head and 1 neck, all of us, and all of us also eating and needing to sleep. For consider, we all make distinctions between men and women, even though men and women both have 2 arms and 2 legs. So do, by the way, infants and those with dementia/Alzheimer's. By the way, so do corpses in a box. Yet we make distinctions. But some distinctions are easier to make than others. And therein lies the rub, for all of us, myself included. Under pressure, we want to streamline things, and so we make assumptions. All too often, I believe them called prejudices or stereotypes. To simplify things under cases of massive pressure, lifestyles involving lots of speed, and desires for lots of money, the quicker the better, and lots of stimulation. Hence, why people are said to be, ironically, so much wiser in terms of perceiving character in the countryside rather than the urban areas, some say. How can you perceive much of anything if, for one thing, you don't have the luxury of time and stresslessness and other freedoms from pressure? to observe, let alone the proper terminology to apply to what you've observed. You might say ultimately then, how can you tell if someone is a genius or a saint or a great leader or a person of fine character, a person of great empathy, or even, arguably, loosely speaking, an angel, for lack of a better term maybe, if one cannot assess them very quickly, and is simply seeing that they are not an infant, not very, very elderly, and have 2 arms and 2 legs and 1 head. To lump all together is, in my opinion, to quote, stereotype or be prejudiced on the basis of the most commonplace of observations. I fall for this all too often, just as much as so many, especially those in the urban settings. Outliers can only be seen in terms of someone quite different who has, yes, 2 arms, 2 legs, can speak, needs to eat and sleep, by way of noticing lots of details, which go by the wayside if one is under lots of pressure in terms of time or stress. Thoughts here?